Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's July 22nd, 2026, and I need you to sit with this for a second, because what I'm about to walk you through is not a rumor. It's not a leak. It's not some anonymous X account guessing at grainy satellite footage. This is confirmed on the record, straight from United States Central Command, and it might be the single most important weapon story to come out of this entire war with Iran. Because a few days ago, without a single American sailor anywhere near the target, without a single manned aircraft in the sky over the impact zone, the United States quietly reached into the Strait of Hormuz and blew a hole in the side of Iran's navy, using a weapon most of you have never heard of. No pilot, no crew, no warning. Just 3 fiberglass boats, about the size of a base fishing boat, that drove themselves into an Iranian naval pier and detonated. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this moment, quietly, without fanfare, might be remembered as the night naval warfare changed forever. So let's rewind and get the facts straight, because I want you to trust every single thing I tell you in this video. And that means showing my work. On July 13th, CENTCOM posted official confirmation on its X account, and I'm reading this directly from their statement. They said that using multiple one-way attack surface drones, CENTCOM forces successfully struck a submarine and ship maintenance facility in Iran, and that 3 Corsair unmanned surface vessels hit the port at Bandar Abbas naval base. That's the exact language CENTCOM used, and they called it, in their own words, the first time American forces have employed sea drones in combat operations. Not a test, not an exercise. Combat. That's confirmed by CENTCOM itself, and it's been independently reported by CBS News, the U.S. Naval Institute's USNI News, Defense Scoop, Breaking Defense, and Naval News. So this isn't a single source claim. This is corroborated across nearly every serious defense outlet covering this war. I'll drop links to those in the description so you can verify every single word I'm telling you today. That's the whole point. I don't want you to just believe me. I want you to be able to check me. And before we go any further, I want you to hold on to one number in the back of your mind for the rest of this video. 0. 0 American sailors near the blast. 0 manned aircraft in that airspace. 0 risk to a single American family back home. Keep that number in your head, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that number is the whole story. Now here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. This strike actually happened on July 12th, a Sunday, and CENTCOM didn't announce it until the following Monday. The target was a raised dock at Bandar Abbas, which sits right at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, and it is the headquarters for a massive chunk of Iran's navy. According to imagery released by CENTCOM and analyzed by USNI News and Naval News, sitting on that gantry, lifted clean out of the water for maintenance, was an Iranian Ghadir-class midget submarine. These are small diesel-electric attack submarines Iran has used for years to lay mines and threaten shipping lanes in the Gulf. And it was sitting there, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, with nothing but 3 small autonomous boats bearing down on it. The released footage, you can go watch it yourself, it's public, shows an aerial view stitched together with onboard camera footage from one of the drones themselves. You watch it close the distance across open water, line up on that pier, and then the screen goes white. 3 separate detonations, according to CBS News, with the final blast triggering what looked like a large secondary fire. No American in harm's way. Not one. Now stop and really think about what you just watched, because I want you to sit in this moment with me. For the entirety of naval history, the way you take out an enemy's navy at the pier was some version of the same story. You send in manned aircraft, you send in a submarine, you send in a destroyer with a deck gun, and there's always a human being strapped into a cockpit or standing on a bridge, risking their life to deliver that payload. What just happened at Bandar Abbas breaks that entire model. This is the first time in American history that a lethal one-way sea drone has been used in an actual combat strike. And it happened not against some symbolic target, but against the literal headquarters of the Iranian Navy sitting at the choke point of one of the most strategically vital waterways on planet Earth. So who builds this thing? This is where it gets even more interesting, because the Corsair isn't some black budget program buried inside a defense giant you've never heard of. It's built by a company called Saranac, based out of Austin, Texas. And according to reporting from Naval News and Defense Scoop, this drone traces its roots back to the Pentagon's Replicator initiative. That's the program specifically designed to get thousands of cheap, attritable, autonomous systems into the hands of American forces fast, specifically to counter the kind of numbers advantage that adversaries like China have been building in the Pacific. The Corsair itself is about 24 feet long. It's got a composite hull. It can move at speeds above 35 knots, and according to the manufacturer's own specifications, confirmed independently by CBS News and USNI News, it can carry a payload of up to 1,000 pounds across more than 1,000 nautical miles. Think about that range for a second. That's not a coastal toy. That's a weapon that can be launched from well outside the range of most coastal defenses, and still reach deep into contested waters completely on its own. And here's a detail that I think gets buried, but it matters a lot. According to a December 2025 announcement, the U.S. Navy signed a $392 million production contract for this exact platform, awarded through the Defense Innovation Unit. This wasn't a surprise. This wasn't some rushed emergency purchase because the war escalated. The Pentagon had already bet real money on this weapon, months before it ever fired a shot in anger. The operational unit flying, or should I say sailing, these things is Task Force 59, which is the unmanned systems arm of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command and the U.S. Fifth Fleet. And according to USNI News, a version of this exact same Corsair platform had already been used earlier in the war in a completely different role, helping in the recovery of the crew of a downed Army Apache helicopter that had been shot down by Iranian drones. So this isn't a one-hit wonder weapon system. It's already been quietly doing real work in this theater before most of the world ever noticed it existed. Let me give you a little more background on Task Force 59 itself, because this unit has been building toward this exact moment for years, quietly without much attention. It was stood up specifically to fold unmanned systems, surface drones, underwater drones, and artificial intelligence into the daily operations of the Fifth Fleet across the Middle East, an area of responsibility that includes the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Oman, some of the most contested and heavily trafficked waters on Earth. For years, that task force ran experiments, exercises, and demonstrations with unmanned boats, mostly unarmed, mostly focused on surveillance and reconnaissance, watching for exactly the kind of Iranian fast attack boats and mine-laying operations that have menaced merchant shipping in this region for decades. What changed on July 12th is that all of that quiet groundwork finally got converted into a live, armed one-way strike, for the first time, against a real target, in a real war. This wasn't a brand new idea rushed into combat. This was years of patient experimentation cashing out in a single, decisive night. And I want to be specific about why the payload and range numbers on this thing actually matter tactically, not just as marketing specs. A 1,000-pound payload means the Corsair can carry a warhead large enough to do real structural damage to a hardened facility, not just a symbolic pinprick. And a 1,000 nautical mile range means these boats don't have to be launched from right off the coast where they'd be easy to detect. They can be pushed out from a mothership, a friendly port, or even a forward operating base well outside the reach of most coastal radar and short-range air defense systems, then creep in low and slow across open water where a small fiberglass hull with a tiny radar signature is brutally hard to pick out from ordinary sea clutter. That is precisely why Iran's coastal defenses, built for decades around detecting fast attack boats, larger surface combatants, and inbound aircraft, apparently never saw these 3 drones coming until it was already too late. Now I know some of you are already making the connection, and you're right too. This playbook did not start in the Persian Gulf. It started in the Black Sea. For years now, Ukraine has been running a campaign using its own Sea Baby and Magura unmanned surface vessels against Russia's Black Sea fleet, and the results have been staggering. Ukraine, a country with basically no traditional navy left to speak of, has used cheap, uncrewed boats to sink or damage a meaningful chunk of Russia's fleet, forcing Moscow to actually pull major warships back from Crimea entirely. That's a country with a fraction of the resources of a modern military, functionally neutralizing a much larger conventional navy using exactly this kind of asymmetric drone warfare. Now, the United States, with the full weight of its industrial base and its defense budget behind it, has taken that exact concept and deployed its own purpose-built version of it in the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a coincidence, and it's not subtle if you know what you're looking at. This is the American military watching what worked in Ukraine and importing it wholesale into a completely different theater within the span of about 2 years. So why does that matter strategically? Because the entire cost equation of naval warfare just got rewritten in front of our eyes. A single Tomahawk cruise missile runs somewhere in the range of a couple $1 million depending on the variant. A modern American warship represents billions of dollars of investment, and more importantly, hundreds of American sailors whose lives are on the line every time that ship goes into a contested strait. The Corsair, by comparison, is a fraction of the cost of a single cruise missile, and when it's expended in a one-way attack mission, the only thing lost is the drone itself. No American life is ever put at risk to deliver that payload. That's the trade a lot of analysts have started calling attritable warfare, where you accept the loss of a cheap asset because the alternative, risking a manned platform or a much more expensive munition, doesn't make sense anymore against certain kinds of targets. And Bandar Abbas, a fixed target, sitting right on the coast, exposed to open water, is exactly the kind of target this weapon was built to kill. Now let's zoom out, because this strike did not happen in a vacuum. And if I only told you about the Corsair without giving you the full picture of the war it's embedded in, I'd be doing you a disservice. This war between the United States and Iran, what CENTCOM has referred to at points as Operation Epic Fury, kicked off in earnest back in late February of 2026, and it has gone through waves of ceasefires, memorandums of understanding, and then renewed, heavier fighting every single time those agreements have frayed. According to Al Jazeera's own tracking, using data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, the United States had conducted well over 100 individual air attacks across Iran just since July 8th alone, part of a renewed campaign after Iran struck commercial vessels transiting a shipping route that Tehran claimed hadn't been approved. CNN's live coverage throughout the past 2 weeks has documented consecutive nights of American strikes, night after night after night, hitting coastal radar sites, missile and drone storage facilities, air defense systems, and increasingly, according to CNN's July 18th reporting, infrastructure like bridges, and even according to a claim from a regional Iranian official that the U.S. military has not confirmed, a desalination plant in the south of the country. And the Corsair strike on the 12th was not the only new weapon making its combat debut in this war. According to reporting from Business Insider and confirmed by Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of U.S. Central Command himself, American forces have also fired the Precision Strike Missile, or PRSM, for the very first time in combat, launched from an Army HIMARS system. Admiral Cooper called that debut, in his own words, a historic first, and described the PRSM as giving the Army an unrivaled deep strike capability. On top of that, according to multiple outlets including Modern Diplomacy and reporting on the war's earliest days, the U.S. has also fielded a low-cost, one-way attack drone called Lucas, reverse-engineered in spirit from Iran's own Shahed-style suicide drones, but layered with encrypted military-grade guidance designed specifically to keep working, even if the drone's GPS signal gets jammed or spoofed. So what you're actually watching unfold across this entire war is not just a fight over the Strait of Hormuz. It's become an open-air proving ground where the United States is combat testing an entire new generation of cheap, attritable, autonomous weapon systems, on the ground, in the air, and now, for the first time, on the water. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I want to know what you think. When you watch footage of an uncrewed weapon driving itself into an enemy target with no human anywhere near the trigger point at the moment of impact, does that make this war feel more distant and abstract to you, more like something out of a video game, or does it make it feel more unsettling, knowing that the barrier to using lethal force just got lower because the cost of doing it in dollars and in American lives just dropped dramatically? I'd genuinely love to hear your take on that in the comments, because I think it's one of the most important questions of this entire conflict, and honestly, of the next decade of warfare in general. Now, let's talk about how Iran is responding to all of this, because their rhetoric has been escalating right alongside the American strike tempo. According to CNN's reporting from July 17th, a top advisor to Iran's supreme leader and senior IRGC official named Mohsen Rezai warned that if American attacks continued for another 2 or 3 days, Iran would, in his words, enter a phase of full-scale offensive operations. And Iran's supreme leader himself, Mojtaba Khamenei, has publicly called the American commitments from earlier in the conflict worthless and unreliable, according to CNN's coverage from that same week. Meanwhile, according to the Iranian Health Ministry's own numbers, as reported by CNN, at least 50 people have been killed inside Iran by American strikes since this latest phase of the conflict reignited in late June, with more than 500 additional people wounded. And on the American side, CENTCOM has confirmed the deaths of American service members in the region as well, including 2 killed in Jordan and another in northern Iraq, during operations connected to this war, with U.S. troop fatalities in the conflict overall climbing past 17, according to statements from President Trump himself in mid-July. And it isn't just Iran and the United States trading blows in isolation. This war has been spilling out across the entire region. According to CNN's July 20th coverage, Kuwait reported intercepting hostile missiles and drones after already absorbing 2 separate rounds of Iranian attacks in a single day. According to CNN's reporting from July 19th, Iran launched missiles toward the Jordanian city of Aqaba, close enough to Israeli territory that senior Israeli officials, including Defense Minister Israel Katz, publicly warned that Israel would respond immediately and without conditions to any Iranian attack on its own soil. Jordan's military said its air defenses intercepted 3 of those incoming missiles, with a 4th landing in a remote area. So what you're really looking at is a conflict that keeps threatening to widen its blast radius, pulling in Kuwait, pulling in Jordan, keeping Israel on a hair trigger, all while the core fight over the Strait of Hormuz keeps escalating night after night. A weapon like the Corsair, one that lets American forces strike a fixed, high-value target without adding a single new front, a single new manned sortie, or a single new opportunity for this thing to spiral even further, becomes incredibly valuable, precisely because the rest of the region is already this combustible. So both sides are absorbing real losses here, and that's exactly why a weapon like the Corsair matters so much strategically. Every time the United States can substitute an autonomous system for a manned strike package against a target like a naval pier or a fixed coastal facility, it reduces the number of American lives directly exposed to Iran's air defenses, to its coastal missile batteries, to its drone and mine-laying capability in the Strait. And on the flip side, and this is the part I think doesn't get talked about enough, it also means Iran's entire coastal defense doctrine, which was built for decades around the assumption that any attacking force needs a manned platform, a jet, a ship, a helicopter that can be shot down and turned into a political win. That doctrine just got a lot less useful. You cannot capture a drone pilot. You cannot parade a captured autonomous boat on state television the same way you can parade a downed aircrew. The propaganda value of shooting down the attacker just evaporated. And that is a massive, massive problem for a regime that has leaned so heavily on exactly that kind of imagery for decades. Let's talk a little more about what this actually looked like from a tactical execution standpoint, because I think walking through it step by step really shows you how deliberate this was. According to Naval News and USNI News, the Corsairs weren't launched in isolation. This strike was part of a much broader wave of attacks that CENTCOM carried out on July 12th, hitting dozens of targets across southern Iran in a single night, including air defense systems, coastal radar installations, missile and drone storage sites, and small boats, using a combination of fighter aircraft, naval vessels, one-way attack aerial drones, and for the first time, these sea drones as well. So the Corsairs weren't the whole show. They were one instrument in a much larger orchestra, but they were specifically tasked with the target set that made the most sense for their unique profile, a low, slow, quiet approach across open water toward a fixed target sitting right at the waterline. You send in the aircraft to suppress air defenses and hit the harder, more mobile targets, and you send in the Corsairs to do exactly what a small, cheap, expendable boat does best: close the final distance on a stationary target without ever putting a human being on that final run. And I think it's worth sitting with just how symbolic the target itself was. A Ghadir-class midget submarine, lifted completely out of the water for maintenance, sitting exposed on a gantry at Iran's most important southern naval base. These submarines are exactly the kind of asymmetric threat Iran has relied on for years to menace the Strait of Hormuz, quietly laying mines, threatening tankers, forcing American and allied navies to divert resources just to track them. And it got taken out not by a submarine hunter, not by a manned strike aircraft, but by 3 autonomous boats that together probably cost a small fraction of what that submarine itself was worth, let alone the aircraft carrier strike group sitting somewhere out in the Arabian Sea that didn't even need to risk a single sortie to make it happen. Now, let's get into the 30,000-foot view, because I want to connect all of these threads together for you. What we are watching happen in the Strait of Hormuz right now is not an isolated news story about one drone strike. It is the live-fire debut of an entirely new era of American naval doctrine, and it is happening in real time, in a shooting war, against a real adversary, not in a training exercise off the coast of California. The Replicator program was designed specifically with a much bigger adversary in mind, a much larger, more industrially capable rival across the Pacific. And the entire theory behind it was that cheap, attritable, autonomous systems could offset a numbers disadvantage in a future conflict. Well, that theory just got its first combat validation, not in some hypothetical future war, but right now, this month, against Iran's Navy. And if you want some historical perspective on just how fast this shift has happened, think back to the year 2000, when the USS Cole, a billion-dollar American guided missile destroyer, was nearly sunk in Aden Harbor by a small boat packed with explosives and crewed by suicide bombers. That attack became a defining trauma for the U.S. Navy, a lesson in just how dangerous a cheap, expendable small boat could be against a much larger, much more expensive warship. 26 years later, the United States has effectively turned that same asymmetric logic completely around and pointed it back at an adversary navy, except now there's no crew to lose, no martyrdom involved, just cold, autonomous, one-way machine logic doing the exact same job that used to require a human being willing to die to carry it out. That inversion, from being the victim of small boat asymmetric warfare to being its most sophisticated practitioner, is, I think, one of the most quietly stunning through lines of the last quarter century of American naval history, and almost nobody is talking about it in those terms. Every lesson the Pentagon draws out of this strike, how the Corsair performed in real sea conditions, how it handled the terminal approach, whether Iranian coastal defenses even detected it before impact, all of that data is going to directly shape how these systems get built, deployed, and used in whatever comes next, wherever that might be. And here's the trend I want you to actually watch for going forward, because I think this is the real headline underneath the headline. Every single new platform that's made its combat debut in this war, the precision strike missile, the Lucas one-way aerial drones, and now the Corsair Sea drones, they all share the exact same underlying philosophy. Cheap over expensive, attritable over exquisite, autonomous over manned. That is not a coincidence. And it is not just about saving money, although it absolutely does save money. It is a wholesale bet from the Pentagon that the future of high-end warfare against any serious adversary is going to be defined by mass, by swarms of cheap systems that can be built fast, replaced fast, and thrown at a target without a single American family getting the knock on the door that no family ever wants to get. This war with Iran, as brutal and as tragic as it has been for the people caught in the middle of it on both sides, has become the place where the United States is quietly proving out exactly what that future looks like. So here's what I want to leave you with. The Corsair strike on Bandar Abbas will probably get a fraction of the news coverage that a single fighter jet strike gets. Because there's no dramatic footage of an F-35 screaming off a carrier deck. There's just a quiet, low-angle shot of 3 small boats gliding across open water before the screen goes white. But I would argue that this quiet little strike, 20-some seconds of footage that most people scrolled straight past, might end up being one of the more historically significant moments of this entire war, because it marks the exact point where lethal, autonomous, one-way sea drones stopped being a research and development talking point and became a combat-proven American weapon, confirmed by CENTCOM, verified by multiple independent defense outlets, and now sitting in the official record of this conflict forever. Let's also talk about what I'd be watching for next if I were sitting in a Pentagon briefing room right now instead of behind this camera. The first thing is scale. 3 Corsairs took out 1 pier and 1 exposed submarine. What happens the first time CENTCOM sends in 10 or 30 all at once against a harder target, a moving target, or a hardened facility with layered point defenses actually watching for exactly this kind of threat? The second thing is countermeasures. Iran, and frankly every Navy watching this footage around the world right now, is going to start investing heavily in exactly the kind of close-in defenses that can detect and destroy a small, low, slow surface drone before it reaches the pier, whether that's networked coastal radar tuned for smaller contacts, remote weapon stations, or simply more alert patrol boats running standing watch. Every weapon like this eventually forces the other side to adapt, and the side that adapts fastest usually wins the next round. And the third thing I'd be watching is exports. Saronic is a private American company, and weapons like the Corsair tend not to stay exclusive to the country that builds them for very long. Watch for allied navies, and eventually rival navies, fielding their own versions of exactly this kind of one-way attack sea drone within the next few years, because that genie does not go back in the bottle. Once a live combat strike proves the concept works this cleanly. I also want to be upfront with you about what we still don't actually know, because part of earning your trust here means I don't pretend to have more certainty than the sourcing actually supports. CENTCOM's video does not give us a clear battle damage assessment. We don't have independent confirmation of exactly how badly that Ghadir-class submarine or the maintenance facility around it were damaged, and Iran's government has not released its own detailed accounting of the strike the way it has, at times, with other incidents in this war. So take the tactical outcome as confirmed. An attack happened, 3 Corsairs were used, CENTCOM says the mission was successful, but treat the precise scale of the damage as still an open question until more imagery or Iranian sourcing becomes available. That distinction matters, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make the story sound bigger than the evidence supports. I want to know what you think this means for the rest of this war. Do you think we're going to see the Corsair used again, maybe against a bigger target, maybe in greater numbers? Do you think Iran is going to be forced to completely rethink how it defends its coastline now that it knows a threat like this can come in low and slow with almost no warning? And honestly, do you think this is the kind of weapon that ends up defining the next decade of naval conflict everywhere? Not just in the Strait of Hormuz, but wherever the next flashpoint happens to be. Drop your thoughts down in the comments because I read every single one of them and I want to hear where you land on this. Every fact I laid out for you today, the CENTCOM statement, the Corsair specifications, the replicator program, the production contract, the Ukrainian Black Sea precedent, Admiral Cooper's own comments on the precision strike missile, all of it is sourced directly from CENTCOM's own public statements and cross-verified through CBS News, USNI News, Defense Scoop, Breaking Defense, Naval News, Business Insider, CNN, and Al Jazeera's own conflict tracking. I do that deliberately every single time because I never want you to have to just take my word for it. I want you to be able to go check the sources yourself and come to your own conclusions. That's how trust actually gets built between a creator and an audience, and I don't take that lightly. And one last thing before I let you go. I know there's a lot of noise out there right now, a lot of channels posting recycled footage with wild, unverified claims slapped over the top just to farm views out of a war that real families on both sides are actually living through and dying in. My promise to you on this channel has always been the same, and it isn't going to change. I would rather show you 3 confirmed, boring-looking boats and walk you through exactly why they matter, with every claim traceable back to CENTCOM's own statement and half a dozen independent outlets, than hand you an exaggerated headline that falls apart the second you click through to the source. That's the deal between us, and I take it seriously every single time I sit down to make one of these videos. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If this kind of deep, sourced breakdown of what's actually happening on the ground and on the water in this war is valuable to you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one, because this conflict is moving fast and there's a lot more coming. This is Ryan, signing off.